Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be with you on a Tuesday night. That was Rabbi Shlomo Katz singing his song, Ka Ribon. How's everybody doing? Let's see who's with us on a Tuesday evening when we are in the midst of packing to go on a little family vacation. As I've mentioned before, there's going to be no class from today. Will be the last class, and then we'll resume not this Friday, but a week from Friday. So keep it going, keep the reading up on your own, and then we'll come back together on Friday, July 9th. We'll be making the siyum on tractate Yoma, the 6th volume of the Talmud. Today we're on page 79. The tractate ends on page 88. 88 is scheduled, I believe, for that Thursday. So on Friday, I'll do a kind of highlights of everything that was covered while I was away. I mean, sort of highlights of all these pages while I was away. And then we'll make a siyum on tractate Yoma. And then Saturday night, we'll start the next tractate, Sukkah, the laws of Sukkot. And there's a nice little bit of foreshadowing in today's daf. So who is with us as we get it going today? Yehudit in South Carolina, wishing us a wonderful and relaxing family vacation. Thank you so much, Yehudit. Paula in Chicago, Melissa in Great Neck, Renee in Indianapolis, James in Indianapolis, Patrice in Utah, Moishe saying hi, everybody, Stephen in New Hampshire, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in Oklahoma, Rebecca in LA, Christo in Lubbock, Moishe's in New York City, John in Scotland. Thank you for tuning in, John. I think I just learned today that you guys don't say Edinburgh or Edinburgh. It's like Edinburgh, something like that. It's like a totally different pronunciation than we Americans would do. And it sounded so good to hear a Scottish person say it. Rochelle is back from eye surgery. May you have a complete healing. Lucy in Minnesota. Lisa in Massachusetts. Gwen having a rainy day in Michigan. Paula telling us it's cooler today in the Great Northwest. I just heard it was 115 degrees in Vancouver, British Columbia yesterday. Unimaginable. That's crazy. Carrie in Santa Clarita. Anthony in Oklahoma. Tom says shalom. And thank you, everybody, wishing us a great vacation. It's great to just spend some time focused on the kids. It's going to be really good. And Bill with us from Missouri. Welcome, everybody. And over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas, Michael in Scranton, and Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. A very quick thought from the Rebbe. That's his picture back there, applauding over there at 770 headquarters of Chabad International at 770 Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights. Here's something that a very quick little story. A man came to the Rebbe requesting his blessings for a cousin who had been diagnosed with cancer. And the Rebbe said, "Our sages teach that a person's physical state can be affected by their spiritual condition. Tell me about your cousin's level of observance." "Well, she's not observant," the man responded. "Well, then encourage her to take a mitzvah upon herself," the Rebbe said. "Can you suggest, for example, that she begin lighting Shabbos candles each Friday night?" And the man replied, "Oh, I believe she already lights Shabbos candles." And as though personally offended, the rabbi exclaimed, "Then how can you say she's not observant?" That's it. That's the whole story. Isn't that beautiful? The Rebbe was just so excited anytime a Jew was connecting to Judaism and connecting to God through Judaism. So it's wonderful, the more mitzvahs you take on yourself. I mean, we have a whole host of obligations that a Jew is supposed to observe. But if you're not doing that, if you're not connected to Judaism already, or if you're not connected to all the mitzvahs, or you don't consider yourself frum or orthodox or shomer Shabbos, great. The sooner you can become those things, the better. But even if you're completely disconnected to that, but if you take on yourself a mitzvah, amazing if you've never done it, just to do it once. But if you could commit to do something regularly, to pray once a day if you don't already do that. If you don't like Shabbos candles, to start lighting Shabbos candles. If you're a man and you haven't wrapped tefillin, do it at least once. If you've already done it once, think about starting to wrap tefillin every day. To take on some mitzvah in a regular way, to say, you know what? I'm here to be of service. This is something that God asked me to do. God has showered me with blessings. This is a simple thing that he asked me to do, and so I'm going to do it. Now, sometimes we think, I'm not ready to commit to do something every day, and I don't want to feel like a hypocrite when I do it once, so I'm not going to do it at all. No, the first step is doing it once. And then if you've already done it once, start thinking about doing it more regularly, right? People that don't have a regular prayer practice, I always say, can you have an alarm on your phone that goes off at the same time every day? And you say you're going to just stop and say, thank you, God. That's a prayer practice. It takes 3 seconds, and then you could build up to a minute a day. That's observant. That is amazing. Eventually, you can keep going up that ladder. It'd be fantastic. But make sure your feet are on the ladder, as it were. Okay, let's get to our daf. We are on page 79. It's a relatively short page. Should be a relatively quick show. We're in chapter 8, the final chapter of Tractate Yoma. These are the laws of Yom Kippur. Chapter 8 is all about laws that are still in place today, as opposed to the first 7 chapters that were all about the high priest performing the Yom Kippur service when the temple or the tabernacle were standing. In this first Mishna of chapter 8, we've been talking about that we're commanded to afflict ourselves. What does that mean? We have to fast. In addition, we also can't bathe, no sexual relations, no wearing shoes, no anointing ourselves with oil. We continue to explore what these laws mean. We learned in the Mishnah, on Yom Kippur, one who eats food the volume of a large date like from a date palm, is liable. And Rav Papa, so liable, right, means that if you eat that much food and you do it intentionally, okay, so then you're liable for violating a Torah prohibition. And the punishment for that would be kares if you do it intentionally. If you do it unintentionally, you could bring the sin offering when the temple is standing. The temple is no longer standing, so it would be something that you'd need to make an atonement for. Ask God's forgiveness, organize your life so you don't do it again. Now, obviously, if a person is so unwell that they're unable to fast, well, then they're excused from fasting. But if you're not that sick, that you can fast on Yom Kippur, so that's something that you need to do. Now, what they're telling us is there's a minimum measure, right? So if you ate less food than the bulk of a large date with its pit, that's what the Mishnah said, then you still violated rabbinic prohibition. You shouldn't eat anything at all, but you haven't violated the biblical prohibition, the Torah prohibition, because the minimum measure for it to be considered eating is the volume of a date, a large date with its pit. So now they're going to try to define that a little bit more. The rabbis didn't have fluid ounces and cc's and other measurements of volume and bulk. So they talked about either an olive bulk or a date bulk or an egg bulk, as we'll see. And there was a little bit of, there's obviously a lot of room for interpretation and argumentation. What does that mean? How much is that actually? So it's so interesting about today's page is how they kind of logically come to understand, okay, well, how do these measurements compare to each other, and how do we define them so that we know what the minimum measure is for liability for this transgression? So Rav Papa asked, the large date bulk that they said, a date bulk or a date volume, the volume of a date, the large date bulk that they said is the measure that determines liability for eating on Yom Kippur. Does this refer to the volume of a large date with its pit or without its pit? Right? And if you think about a dry date with a large pit, that's going to make a big difference. As we'll see, quite a big difference in terms of percentage. So Rav Ashi asked a similar question. The Mishnah, in another tractate, states that a piece of bone that is the volume of a barley grain imparts tuma, ritual impurity. Does this refer to the volume of a barley grain with its husk or without its husk? And is it referring to a wet kernel or a dry one? So they're making an analogy from the law of ritual impurity that if you touch, like a piece of a human corpse, let's say a bone, that's been left over, and this could happen. Like there was a battle, there were a bunch of people buried, bodies were buried in a field, it was plowed over tragically, and then little pieces of bone were found. So if you touch like the littlest bit, a barley grain is the minimum measure. So then you contracted ritual impurity, and you would have to go through that purification process for touching a human corpse. So, but when we talk about a barley grain, does it mean a wet one or a dry one? Does it mean one with its husk or without its husk? And they're drawing an analogy to that question as we ask, well, for the minimum volume of eating food on Yom Kippur, is it a large date with its pit or without its pit? Since it is stated in the Mishnah, large, in our Mishnah, it means as large as possible, which must include the pit. Conversely, Rav Papa did not ask the question that Rav Ashi asked regarding the size of the barley grain bulk because the answer was clear to him. Wet barley has a different name. It's called shibboleth, and it's not called barley. And without its shell, it is no longer called barley either, but rather it is called ushla. Therefore, that Mishnah, with regard to ritual impurity of a human corpse minimum measure, must be referring to dry barley with its shell. So Rava said that Rav Yehuda said, the volume of a large date that they said is larger than an egg bulk. We're trying to define what is this large date, right? With or without its pit, we're asking. And now in the Mishnah, it said with it. It said the minimum measure for it being liable for eating on Yom Kippur is the volume of a date and its pit. So why are they asking whether it has the pit or not? The Mishnah seemed to say the date and its pit. And the note here explains, well, first of all, the contraction for and is just a vav at the beginning of the word, and sometimes it means or. So it might have been read, the minimum measure for eating, for being liable for eating on Yom Kippur is the volume of a large date or its pit. Also, there could be a question sometimes as the date dries, there's like a space there. So there's the volume of the date, the volume of its pit, and there's some more volume when the pit is in the date because there's some space between the walls of the date and its pit. So that's why they're asking this question. So they haven't answered that yet, but now they're going to go make a little bit of a journey by comparing to an egg bulk, which is actually a more common measure for the sages. So Rava said that Rav Yehuda said, the volume of a large date that they said is larger than an egg bulk. And the sages have an accepted tradition that with this amount of food, the mind, the mind of the one who eats it is settled. Right? So if you eat an egg bulk of, if you're starving and all you can think about is food, okay, so they give you some food that's the volume of an egg. So you ate something, now at least you could, think about other things and you wouldn't be so obsessed with eating that you couldn't think about anything else. It doesn't mean that you're not still hungry, but if you had an egg volume worth of food, the mind would settle down, would settle down a little bit. You could contemplate other ideas. So the sages have an accepted tradition that with this amount of food, an egg bulk, the mind of the one who eats it is settled and he is not afflicted, right? On Yom Kippur, you need to be afflicted. You need to afflict yourselves. We saw that commandments 5 times in the Torah. You shall afflict yourselves on Yom Kippur. Now, less than this amount, the mind is not settled. So the Gemara raises an objection from what we have learned. An incident happened on the festival of Sukkot. Sukkot, the laws of Sukkot, is the subject of the next tractate, right? The 7th volume of the Talmud that we'll be going into next with God's help. So an incident occurred on Sukkot. They brought a cooked dish to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai to taste, and they brought to Rabban Gamliel, who was the Nasi, they brought Rabban Gamliel 2 dates and a tankard of water. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel said to them, bring them up to the sukkah. Bring that food up to the sukkah, and we will eat there. And a baraisa was taught in that regard. They did not act this way because that is the halacha, the law, that such food must be eaten in the sukkah. Rather, they wish to be stringent upon themselves and not eat anything outside the sukkah. So, during Sukkot, any meal, like an actual meal, and remember what defines a meal, that you had bread with it. So if any meal that you're going to have has to be eaten in the sukkah. If you're just having a snack, if it's a bit of casual eating, you're not you're not obliged, you're not obligated to eat that in the sukkah. Right? The sukkah is the little hut that we put up outside our house, and we're meant to eat and sleep there during the festival of Sukkot. If possible, sleep there. Definitely eat there during the whole festival, a week-long festival in the fall. So if you're having a meal during Sukkot, you must eat it in the sukkah. If you're having a snack, you don't have to eat it in the sukkah. But those who wish to be stringent upon themselves will even have their snacks in the sukkah. And that's what's going on here, right? They brought a cooked dish to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai to taste, right? They didn't bring him the whole cooked dish as the meal. They just brought him a taste of it, a little taste of the meal that they would maybe be having later. He said, I'll take it in the sukkah. And for Rabban Gamliel, they brought him 2 dates and a container of water. So they didn't need to eat that in the sukkah. It doesn't count as a meal. Maybe it doesn't count as eating. That's where we're going. But they decided to eat in the sukkah as a stringency upon themselves. So from their behavior, we can't really determine whether that was the minimum amount to constitute eating these 2 dates. On the other hand, the Gemara reports, and when they gave Rabbi Tzadok food that was less than an egg bulk to eat, he held it in a cloth and did not wash his hands. And he ate it outside the sukkah and did not recite the grace after meals afterwards. So this volume of food that Rabbi Tzadok ate that was less than an egg bulk, it definitely didn't require him to eat it in the sukkah, and he didn't eat it in the sukkah. So the Gemara clarifies. Food that has now we're at the top of the B side of 79. The Gemara clarifies. Food that has the volume of an egg bulk is required to be eaten in a sukkah. If it should enter your mind to say that the volume of the large date that they spoke of is larger than the volume of an egg bulk, then we have a contradiction. Now, comparing the 2 episodes, it seems that 2 dates without their pits are not the volume of an egg. Because if it was the volume of an egg, then you would have to eat it in the sukkah. So here's this idea, well, even if it's a snack, but it's more than the volume of an egg, you should eat it in the sukkah. What is the law? The volume of an egg bulk is required to be eaten in a sukkah. In Tractate Sukkah, the reasoning is refuted. Although it seems that the argument cited here is forced, this Gemara is more logical. So we haven't really arrived at what's the minimum amount of food. Let me see. I don't know if we've arrived at... It seems like from the behavior of Rabbi Tzadok, it seems that, he said, he's having an egg bulk, or he's having less than an egg bulk, so he didn't need to eat it in the sukkah. But if he had more than an egg bulk, he would have had to eat it in the sukkah. So maybe the minimum, if you have more than an egg bulk, you have to eat it in the sukkah. Okay, but how does a date compare to an egg bulk? That's the question we're asking now. Right, so the Gemara clarifies. Food that has the volume of an egg bulk is required to be eaten in a sukkah. Boom, there it is. If it should enter your mind to say that the volume of the large date that they spoke of is larger than the volume of an egg bulk, then we have a contradiction. So we compare the 2 episodes. When we do, it seems that the 2 dates without their pits are not the volume of an egg. If so, can the volume of a large date and its pit be greater than that of an egg bulk? If we say that 2 dates without their pits are smaller than an egg bulk, how could we possibly say that a large date with its pit is larger than an egg bulk? It seems to be illogical. But Rav Yirmiyah said, well, yes, although 2 dates without their pits are not equal to an egg bulk, the volume of a large date and its pit are larger than an egg bulk, since date pits are very large. And Rav Papa said this explains the folk saying that people say, in 2 kav, which is a large volume, of dates, there is 1 kav and more of pits, meaning that the volume of the pit is larger than that of the fruit itself. Especially when it dries up, the fruit around the pit is actually not as big by volume as the pit. Not so surprising. Sometimes you get an avocado where it seems like there's more pit than avocado, and this seems to be the case with dates. Rava said, the entire line of reasoning has no basis. He's disagreeing with this whole thing. There, in the incident of the sukkah, this is the reasoning that the law permits eating the dates outside the sukkah. It's due to the fact that dates are fruit. What is going on? Nina, if you're listening, I need a glass of water, please. So according to Rava, the reason you don't have to eat dates in a sukkah is because they're fruit. It doesn't matter what their volume is when we're actually talking about dates and not using dates as a volume. When we're actually talking about eating dates, they're fruit. And fruit need not be eaten in the sukkah, but may be eaten outside the sukkah during Sukkot. And the Gemara raises an objection. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, when we would learn Torah with Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua, they brought before us figs and grapes, and we ate them as a casual meal outside the sukkah. And the Gemara analyzes this. This implies that in the case of a casual meal, yes, it may be eaten outside of a sukkah, but a fixed meal may not be eaten outside the sukkah. Therefore, a meal consisting of fruit must be eaten in a sukkah. And the Gemara rejects this. Oh, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shach kol nihim divrah. Now, we've said many times that a meal, an actual meal, is if you have bread with the rest of your food. So if your food is just fruit, have you had a meal? Now it seems to be suggesting, well, yeah, if you ate fruit as a meal, you called it a meal, you thought of it as a meal, well, then you should eat that in the sukkah because it's a meal and all your meals have to be in the sukkah. The Gemara rejects this. That is the wrong inference. Instead, say we ate them as if they were a casual meal, which may be eaten outside of the sukkah, meaning that eating fruit is always considered a snack, right? So it's not a meal. Even if you eat a whole lot of fruit, and of course you could fill up on fruit, but when we're talking about the laws of blessings and the minimum measures and whether you need to eat it in the sukkah or not, and what blessing you're going to say before and after, etc., if your whole meal is fruit, you might fill up on it, but it's not considered a meal. It's casual eating or a snack. We skip down just a little bit. Now, Rav Zevid said, the volume of a large date that they spoke of in our Mishnah about eating on Yom Kippur is less than an egg bulk, as we learned in another Mishnah. Beis Shammai say, the followers of Shammai, with regard to leaven, the sourdough used to make dough rise, ownership of the volume of an olive bulk during Passover violates the prohibitions in the following verses that are stated with regard to Passover. Exodus 13:7, and no leavened bread shall be seen with you. And Exodus 12:19, 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. So there's two prohibitions there. One is with regard to leavened bread, and the other one just says leaven. So the minimum amount of leaven, which is sourdough as opposed to actual bread, the minimum amount of leaven, if you own or have in your house an olive bulk of leaven during Passover, you have violated these laws, these restrictions of Passover. And the Gemara continues, and we discussed it. And what is the reason for the opinion of Beis Shammai? If both leaven and leavened bread had the same measure that determines liability, then let the merciful one write only leavened bread, and he would not need to write leaven. If you can't have leavened bread, obviously you can't have leavening, you can't have this sourdough in your possession. So I would say, based on logic, if leavened bread, whose leavening ability is not as strong as leaven, as sour bread, so if leavened bread does not have, whose leavening ability is not as strong, is prohibited at an olive bulk, All the more so should not leaven itself, whose leavening ability is strong because it causes dough to rise. It should also be prohibited at an olive bulk, since the merciful one distinguishes between them, between leaven and leavened bread. This taught you that the minimum measure for possession to violate this law during Passover, the minimum measure for one is not the same as the minimum measure of the other. The measure that determines liability for leaven is an olive bulk, like in the case of most prohibitions of the Torah. And the measure that determines liability for leavened bread, whose leavening ability is weaker, is what? Is the volume of a large date. Like here, the amount of food that you would need to eat on Yom Kippur to become liable for eating on Yom Kippur is this same measure, the large date, the volume of a large date. So the Gemara clarifies, and if it should enter your mind to say the volume of the large date that they spoke of is greater than an egg bulk, since Beis Shammai are searching for the measure that's one size larger than an olive bulk, right? There's three measures: olive bulk, date bulk, and egg bulk. We know olive bulk is the smallest, and what we're trying to figure out is the date bulk smaller or larger than the egg bulk, right? Which is the medium and which is the large? Is the date smaller or large? Is the date the medium one and the egg is the largest? Or is the egg bulk the medium one and the date bulk is the largest? So the large date that they spoke of is greater than the egg bulk, since Beis Shammai are searching for the measure that's one size larger than an olive bulk, as they prove that leavened bread must have a larger measure than an olive bulk. And if the measure one size larger than an olive bulk is an egg bulk, then let them teach an egg bulk and not a date bulk. Since they're looking for a measure that's one larger than an olive and they choose date, it must be that the date bulk is the medium size and the egg bulk is the large size. Alternatively, if they are exactly the same volume, the large date and the egg, and the volume of a large date has the same volume as an egg bulk, they should have taught an egg bulk, which is the more commonly used measure, and that's why Beis Shammai should have used it in their example. Rather, must one not conclude from here that the volume of a large date is less than an egg bulk? But the Gemara rejects this reasoning. From where is your proof? Perhaps I could actually say to you that the measure of the volume of a large date that they said is larger than an egg bulk. However, the volume of a date of normal size is the same as an egg bulk, and Beis Shammai were referring to a normal size date. So maybe date bulks are come in two sizes, the normal date and the large date. Our Mishna here in Yom Kippur does say a large date and its pit. Alternatively, say that the volume of a large date and an egg bulk are equal, and the Mishnah chose to use one of them. Either way, there is no proof from here that the volume of a large date is larger than an egg bulk, or smaller. We don't know. So rather, it cannot be proven from here. So we look elsewhere. Proof can be found from here. How much must one eat to obligate those with whom he ate in a zimun, an invitation for the grace after meals? So when we actually eat a meal that has bread in it, so we make a motzi before, we're going to wash our hands, we're going to make a blessing over bread before we eat, then we have our meal, and then after the meal, we're obligated to recite the full grace after meals, the Birkat Hamazon. If we only had a snack, we might have eaten a bunch of food, but we didn't have bread with it, we didn't wash for it, then we just say the very abridged grace after the meal, the blessing after the meal, that you say when somebody eats like grain products or grapes or wine. And if we didn't even have those foods that are included in those special blessings, then there's a very short blessing that we would say after eating. But if we actually did have a meal, okay, so then you have to say the grace after the meal. But if 3 people or more ate together, then that grace after the meal has a special introduction where one person invites the others to join him and the other 2 or more answer. So that special addition to the grace after meals is called a zimun, and you have to have at least 3 people who partook of that meal. So let's say 2, really ate a whole meal. There's a third who was with them, sitting at the table, having conversation, but he only drank coffee. So no zimun, because 3 people didn't have the meal. What's the minimum measure for a person who was present, the minimum amount that he has to eat in order for us to add the zimun, the invitation to the grace after the meals? That's the question they're wondering about. How much must one eat to obligate those with whom he ate in an invitation for grace after meals? An olive bulk of food suffices to obligate those with whom they ate in a zimun. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says an egg bulk is the minimum measure to obligate those with whom they ate in a zimun. So the Gemara clarifies, with regard to what do they disagree? Because it would seem like now they're going from the smaller to the next size up. So this indicates maybe that the egg bulk is the next size. Olive bulk, then egg bulk, and then the large date would be larger still. Is that what's being said here? Let's see. With regard to what do they disagree? Rabbi Meir holds that the verse, Deuteronomy 8:10, and you shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God. That's the Torah obligation to recite the grace after the meal. And you shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God. It should be understood as follows. And you shall eat, this is referring to eating, and be satisfied, this is referring to drinking. And the definition of eating throughout the Torah is consuming an olive bulk. Rabbi Yehuda holds, and you shall eat and be satisfied, is referring to eating that causes satisfaction. And what is that? The volume of an egg bulk. Less than that amount of food is not satisfying. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda is jumping up to the egg bulk. Maybe he's going past the medium size, the date bulk, if that's in fact where the date bulk sits. Because what he's saying is you're not obligated to recite the grace after the meal unless you ate in a way that satisfies you, that can be said to satisfy you. Maybe you're not full, but we're going to call it satisfying if you eat at least an egg bulk. I'm almost done, so get your comments and questions in. And if it should enter your mind to say that the volume of the large date that they spoke of is larger than an egg bulk, well, then the following question must be asked. Now that we have said that the volume of an egg bulk is the minimum amount we can call satisfying, can we say that it does not settle the mind and therefore remove the affliction of Yom Kippur? Satisfy is one step up from settling the mind. Right? So if something satisfies, then for sure it settles the mind. There's an amount that's more than an olive bulk and less than an egg bulk. An egg bulk satisfies, an olive bulk doesn't. And in between, there's the minimum amount that settles the mind, so you're not so afflicted like you need to be on Yom Kippur. And so this would indicate that the volume of a large date and its pit is that in-between size between an olive bulk and an egg bulk. Rather, must one not conclude from this that the volume of a large date that they said in our Mishna is less than the size of an egg bulk? Eating the larger amount of an egg bulk satisfies a person, but eating the volume of a large date merely settles his mind. That's what we've got today. Let me go to your comments and questions. In case you weren't here at the beginning, let me remind you that there won't be any class from now until Friday, July 9th. We're going on a family vacation. Keep reading on your own. When I return on Friday, July 9th, I'll just cover a bunch of highlights from the pages from now until the end of our track date, which ends at page 88. And we'll make a siyum that day, a celebration of completing track date Yoma. And then that's a Friday. And so that Saturday night, we'll begin the next track date, Sukkah. We'll be a day behind on that, and we'll probably do the double page to catch up on that Sunday. We don't want to do a double page on a Saturday night in the summer when Shabbat ends so late. Okay, comments and questions. There's only one question, and I answered it. Do you bench after a meal that doesn't include bread? No, we do not. And Christo adds, a good friend of mine is a type 1 diabetic, so since he cannot fast safely, he eats only what he must to keep his glucose in a safe range, and his practice is to only eat food he really dislikes so that he won't have any eating pleasure. Perfect. That's exactly what you would want to do. He has to eat something to be safe. It would be harmful otherwise. but he wants to make sure that he's not eating in a manner that is satisfying or even settling the mind. He wants to feel that he's afflicting himself and fulfilling that obligation on Yom Kippur. So eat stuff that he doesn't like purely to keep himself safe. It's almost like medicinal eating that your friend is doing. Okay, my friends, that's it. That's what we've got for today. I hope everybody is blessed. First of all, Shabbos is coming. It's only Tuesday now, but I won't be with you this coming Friday. So have a great, great Shabbos. May it be meaningful, healthy, joyful. May the days between now and Friday, July 9th, be healthy and inspiring and prosperous for you and for your family. And that's it. Have a great, great evening. And with God's help, we'll be together again on July 9th. All the best.